So in the morning session, I talked about the extra credit opportunity, and it should show on discussions now. And then, so just to make sure everyone knew about the extra credit, you can check under the announcements. The details are on there. And then someone had asked about being able to access the quizzes and exams. And I just wanted to remind everyone that all of your previous quizzes and exams are accessible. You can always go back into them and look at how you did on them. The only thing that doesn't appear is the correct answers. Then for the final, make sure that your laptop or your computer is able to use the Respondus lockdown and the webcam. And for the final exam, more so than any of the other exams, make sure you do a really good environmental scan. And that's where in exams 1, 2, and 3, I only watch them when I only watch your environmental scan if Respondus flags you for the final exam, because it's such a heavy component of your exam. I will need to watch all of them before I can proceed and grade your exams. So just to make sure you know about that. Another difference is that your final exams are open from Friday to Sunday, where your exams 1 through 3 was open Sunday to Monday. So, and the reason for that is because the last day of classes is on a Sunday, and that's why you only have until Sunday to take your final exams. For the lecture exam, it's 100 questions, 50 is on the old materials. It includes multiple choice, true, false questions. Then the other 50 questions is on the new content. So think of it as your 4th exam. So the format is pretty similar. There's 40 multiple choice, true, false, and then 10 fill in the blanks at the end. You will have 100 minutes to take that. And then for your lab final exam, it has 50 questions. 25 is on the old material and 25 is on the new material. And you can expect terms from like the lab 1 and lab 2, and then the rest are all identification. If there are 2 of something, in other words, if there's like a pair of something, usually we indicate it by right and left. So make sure if there's a pair of something, you do indicate right and left if that's appropriate. You will have 75 minutes to take the lab exam and spelling counts. Okay, so one of the students from this morning session asked whether it's a good idea to review the old quizzes and exams. Are they going to be the same question? Well, that depends. So for lecture, it is a different pool of questions. In other words, you're not going to see it word for word, but the content is going to be the same. Okay, where with the lab, the pool questions are going to be the same. Okay, they're going to be all of the pictures that you've been quizzing that you see on your quizzes and your exam 1 through 3. So it is from the same pool. But again, these are pools, which means they're randomized. So I can't guarantee that you'll get a specific question. Any questions on these before I move on? Okay. So then we spent all of the time, the entire review session this morning on the urinary system. And I will post the recording. I also do recommend watching the supplemental video because it does have more. Because of the limited time, I was only really able to talk about your information, where in the supplemental video, I was able to cover more, okay? And we didn't have time to do endocrine.
Hey, Professor, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. What's up, Juliet?
I had a question about the lecture exam. Is
Yes.
there, like, the old material, is there going to be any specific chapter that's going to have more questions than others that we need to focus on?
No, ma'am, they're divided equally between all the chapters. And that's why amongst all the chapters, I divided by 50, and it comes to about like 3 to 5 questions per chapter.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yep. And that's going to be same for the new content as well. So within the new content, there are 4 chapters: urinary, endo, male reproductive, and female reproductive. So divide by 50, that comes to about 10 to 13 questions per chapter. Okay. Other questions? That's a great question. Other questions? I see some in the chat. Let me open it up. Can we have a blank sheet of paper during the exam? Yes. So same thing and that's why the environmental scan is going to be so important, is that you have to show that front and back on the environmental scan. Another question, is lab final mostly on the new material? No, it's divided 50-50. So of that 50 questions, 25 is on the new materials and 25 questions is on the old material. When is that due? Juliet, were you asking about the extra credit?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, the extra credit is due the same day that the final exam deadline is, because that's the last day of classes. So that's the last day I can accept things.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Okay. All right, great questions.
What's the study strategy for the lab? Should we study the stuff we're the strongest on? If there's one that we're not really good at remembering, what would you recommend for a study strategy for the lab part?
That's going to be different, and that's why I kind of met with you with the students one-on-one. It's going to be different from student to student. So I'm hoping that, with your experience with the first 3 exams, that you've picked up something that works well for you. So for me, if you're asking what I would do as a student, I would focus on the new material, because I know that that's where the bulk of the questions are going to be on. And what I would do is I would use that PDF and just constantly quiz myself. Use the PDF in terms of like not putting the answers on them, but just numbering them. And I would go back and I would do them. And that will help me with seeing whether I can identify it or not, as well as seeing if I can spell it correctly or not. So that's the strategy that I would use to study for the lab.
Yeah, because there's 25, there'll be easily 25 right there between endocrine, urinary, and reproductive kidney.
Yep.
So, yeah.
Yep, I would definitely go with the new stuff first and then do the old stuff. And for every single thing in lab, I would use the PDF method, to be honest. Yep, because that will help me with identification and spelling. Yep, I see one in, oh, Julia. Okay, so muscles was the hardest for you. So remember, right? Muscles is from the old chapter, which means that from all of those old chapters, it's only going to make up 25 questions. Okay, so for me, and I'm not speaking for any of you, but for me, if there's one chapter and if there was only like one chapter that I really struggled, I would review it, but I wouldn't spend a lot of time on it. I'd rather spend my time on the new stuff, because of all the old chapters, every single one of those old chapters has to fit those 25 questions. So that means there's probably only going to be about like 2 to 3 questions in the lab on any of the old stuff. That means 2 to 3 questions on the muscles. At that point, I would go, okay, I'd rather focus on the urinary, for example, because that's going to mostly be like 10 questions, not 10, that's over exaggeration, more like 5 or 7. Does that make sense, Juliet?
Yes, ma'am. I just wanted to like do the best I can.
I know. We all do, right? And I want the best for you as well, for the students as well. But I would say if I were a student, that would be my strategy. If I knew that muscles were my only weakness, I would focus on the new stuff and just say, okay, I'm going to use my few points off and count that as the muscles and spend my time on the new stuff. That's what I would do. I can't speak for any of you. Okay. All right. So then we spent a lot of time on the urinary system. Didn't really have time to go through the endocrine, but again, there should be some videos for that, as well as worksheets. Okay, so I'm gonna start with the male reproductive system. And then from there,
Can I ask you one more question?
Yes.
If we know, like, I don't remember if you saw my comment this morning, but if we know, like, the scripts really good, do you think we'll be okay on the exam?
Yeah, I would have to agree that since all of the questions come from the script.
Okay, so it's none of the worksheets or anything has questions on the exam?
Well, they're the same, right? The worksheets should test your knowledge on the scripts.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. Okay. So the difference, Juliet, is that the script is the content that you're responsible for, and the worksheet is for you to kind of quiz yourself and work through whether you understand the script or not. Does that make sense? Because the worksheets doesn't contain the content. It's questioning your knowledge of the content.
Gotcha.
So one you're using to study, and the other one you're using to measure your assessment, your understanding.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. All right. So to the male reproductive system, you want to make sure that you know the following main things, which includes what's the function of the male reproductive system. Okay. So let's just go through that. What do you think the functions of the male reproductive system is? Or are? Well, what's the primary one? To produce what? Yeah. To produce the sperm. And in addition to producing the sperm, it does also produce what?
Testosterone.
Yeah, hormones. And you're right, it's testosterone. Okay. All right. Then describe the male reproductive organs and their functions, and make sure you understand what the testes are. And then in the testes, you'd find the seminiferous tubules that then become the retitestes, that then become the epididymis, the ductus deferens, exits through the penis, connects with the urethra, as well as the accessory glands that also deposit substances along the male reproductive system. You should understand spermatogenesis, and that's what we're going to be focusing on, as well as being able to know the composition of semen, the function of the components of semen, as well as the anatomy of a sperm. And that's where we're talking about spermiogenesis versus how that is different from spermatogenesis. Okay. Before we move any further, though, we're going to review kind of reproductive 101. Okay, so some of the things in reproductive 101 that you should know are some terminology. For example, you should know what a gamete is. What's a gamete? What's a gamete?
Is it a reproductive cell?
So gametes are sex cells, yep. And the male gamete would be a sperm, where the female gamete is an egg or an ova for plural, an ovum for single. Okay. You should know terms like a zygote. What's a zygote? No, Matt. Chromosomes are not sex cells. Chromosomes are the genetic information that you find in sex cells. So you should also know what a zygote means. What's a zygote? So you have gametes.
The
Yeah, go ahead.
product of fertilization.
Exactly. So it is a new cell. And you're right, it's a product of fertilization. And essentially it combines the genetic information from the gametes. Okay. You should know what are the forms of cell division. There are two forms of cell division. What are they? Yep, mitosis and meiosis. What are they and how are they different? Let's start with mitosis. What's mitosis?
It's the cell division process occurring in zygotes and somatic cells.
Yes. So essentially, to make that a little bit more simplified, it's cell division of all cells except for gametes. Where meiosis then would be cell division for gametes. Okay. I'm going to add a new slide in here. Home, new slide. That, oops. Get rid of this. Okay. So I'd rather spend some time at the beginning to talk about mitosis and meiosis. So it makes more sense when I actually go through spermatogenesis and oogenesis. Okay. So here's mitosis. And here's meiosis. Okay. So all cells except for gametes have what in common?
Chromosomes.
Yep. It's in the number of chromosomes though. So there's a question, is zygote not a type of gamete? It's not at all. And this is where and we're going to get at the difference right now. So a zygote and all the other cells except for gametes have 46 chromosomes. Okay. And just to make sure we understand, chromosomes are genetic codes. Okay, in other words, DNA that's been coiled up. Okay, so a regular cell, including a zygote and all the other cells except for gametes, have 46 chromosomes. The chromosomes look something like this. So although it has 46 chromosomes, it's actually pairs of chromosomes. So for example, you'd have chromosome 1, chromosome 1, chromosome 2, chromosome 2. So you have identical copies of chromosomes 1 to 22. Okay. We call these autosomes because they are identical, because the pairs are identical. Where the chromosome 23, okay, this one, so you have two chromosome 23s, but these are not identical to each other, and that's why they're called sex chromosomes. So they determine gender, biological gender. Okay, so if you are XX, genetically you are female. If you're XY, genetically you are male. Okay, so of the 46 chromosomes, we can technically write it as 20. Another way of saying 46 chromosomes is 23 pairs. Another way of expressing that is 2n. Okay, so 46 chromosomes total. can be expressed as 23 pairs or 2n. You'll see any one of these three versions. Okay, so in mitosis, what's going to happen is that these chromosomes are going to copy each other. They go through a copying process where now it has 92 chromosomes. Or another way of saying that is 46 pairs. Okay, and then it divides. So in mitosis, it's a copying of the chromosome and then dividing, splitting, so that it becomes two new cells that are identical to each other because it was just a pure copy that has 46 chromosomes. So at the end of mitosis, you have two cells that are identical to each other and identical to this original cell. Okay, what confuses students sometimes is that, oh, does that mean we have three cells then? Because one is the original and then two are the ones that divide. No, the original divided. So technically from one, you have two, you don't have three. Okay, so in mitosis, this is what happens. And these cells are what we call daughter cells. So the daughter cells are identical to each other. As well as the parent cell. And that's a misdemeanor because, you know, when like humans reproduce, we have the parents and then we have the children. So from like two, it became three. This is not really a parent cell because it's going to split and become one of the two new cells. Okay, so in mitosis, you start off with one cell and you end up with two cells. And these two cells are identical to each other, as well as the original cell. Okay, so think of it like your skin cell. Your skin cells divide constantly, but they're all the same. If I take a skin cell in your feet, it's going to be the same skin cell that you find on your hands, for example. Okay. All right. And then in meiosis, they work with gametes. So that brings us to what are gametes. So gametes, we know, are sex cells, right? And what happens in gametes, in sex cells, is that they only have 23 total chromosomes, which is perfectly fine. Because if you have 23 from the parent, each parent, when they come together to make that zygote is going to be a cell that has 46 chromosomes. It just happens that it's contribute from each of the parent, okay? So gametes by themselves have 23 chromosomes, and another way of saying that is 1n. So in other words, they have chromosome 1, chromosome 2, chromosome 3, all the way to chromosome 23. Okay? So a gamete would either have an X or a Y for chromosome 23. Okay? So in meiosis has two steps. We learn that it has meiosis in general, but meiosis has two steps. There's meiosis 1 and meiosis 2. Okay? So in meiosis 1, we start a little bit further up from what we call a parent cell or a germ cell that originally has 46 chromosomes. Okay? And then it divides and becomes two gametes. And then the gametes divide further to become 4. Okay? But the point is that meiosis is going to produce gametes. Okay? So that's kind of one of the difference between gametes versus zygotes or any other cell, any somatic cell in your body. Questions? Okay. So those are some of the terms that you should know. And we talked about the role of chromosomes and how the 23rd chromosome is the sex chromosome. Okay, so now we're gonna go into, just to save time, I'm gonna skip over the anatomy and I'm gonna go straight to spermatogenesis, okay? So this process is spermatogenesis, not to be confused with spermiogenesis, which happens at this point on. Okay. So in spermatogenesis, we start with the spermatogonium right here. And this spermatogonium has how many chromosomes? So this is two chromosomes? Or do you mean 2N? Juliet, what do you mean by two? Like 2 total chromosomes, or do you mean 2N?
I don't know.
You know, this is the best time to figure that out, and it's completely okay not to know. That's why we're doing this session. So 2, I think you're meaning 2N, okay? So a spermatogonium, you can think of this as a germ cell. Not to be confused with, like, sometimes people use germ cells as for like germs, bacteria. No, in anatomy and physiology, when we say germ cells, we mean like stem cells, that they're still dividing, they're still, you know, deciding what they want to be. Okay, like stem cells. Okay, so when we say germ cells, we mean like stem cells. We don't mean like bacteria cells. Okay, so this is a germ cell. In other words, it's going to continuously undergo mitosis and become another cell. Okay, just like, you know how you learned about osteogenic cells. Osteogenic cells are germ cells or stem cells that will become osteoblasts, and then the osteoblast becomes the osteocytes. Same thing here. So the spermatogonium is a germ cell, or you can think of it as a stem cell. Okay, so this cell will have 46 total chromosomes. Okay, or I can write it as 2N, or I can write it as 23 pairs. And essentially, chromosome 1, they're the same because there's pairs. The only different pair is going to be in which number, which chromosome. 23, perfect. So in chromosome 23, because I'm looking at a spermatogonium, what are my options going to be? I'm going to have what? One of the chromosome 23 is going to be what, and the other one has to be what, because this is a spermatogonium, not an oogonium. Perfect. One is going to be X, and the other one's going to be Y. Perfect. Thank you. Excellent. Okay. So you can see that this spermatogonium is going to undergo mitosis. Okay. And mitosis is a copy and divide, right? So it's going to copy the chromosomes, and then it's going to divide so that you have 2 new daughter cells. Okay. True or false? These daughter cells are going to be identical. Mitosis. Are these cells going to be identical?
Yes.
Yes, it is identical. Because remember, mitosis always produces identical daughter cells. It's just that one of them is referred to as type A, because type A is going to repeat the mitosis process. Where the other one, it's identical, but is referred to as type B because this is the one that will differentiate. Okay, we use the term differentiate. We've used that before in this class. Just like osteogenic cells differentiate into osteoblasts, which then differentiate into osteocytes. You can think of it as a baby becoming a toddler, becoming a high school student, becoming a college student. So as they age, they pick up a particular function. That's what differentiates means. It's the same cell, but it just, as it progresses through time, it picks up a specific function. And it turns out that this daughter cell that's labeled as type B will be the ones that will continue onward to become a sperm, where daughter type A just goes back to being a spermatogonium and repeats that division process. Okay? Now, the daughter B type, okay, is going to begin meiosis 1. And what was the purpose of meiosis again? It's cell division to do what? To make what?
To produce gametes?
Yes. Perfect. Okay. So you can see, look at this picture and you tell me what happens in this picture. What do you see only happening? So the type B spermatogonium becomes a primary spermatocyte. When it becomes a primary spermatocyte, it's going to undergo meiosis 1. Okay, so type B spermatogonium is going to be similar to the spermatogonium prior to that. So it's going to have 46 chromosomes or 2N. Okay, a primary spermatocyte continues to have 2N, but once it undergoes meiosis 1, what happens to the chromosome numbers?
Can you repeat that?
Sure. The primary spermatocyte, which has 2N, undergoes meiosis 1. Describe to me, what do you see in this picture?
Does it divide?
It divides. Very good, Juliet. So in meiosis 1, what happens is a pure division without any copying. Good job, Ariel. So in meiosis 1, only division happens. So essentially, it goes like this, and now becomes 2. That means that this first secondary spermatocyte has how many chromosomes? So if you have 2 and you divide it into 2, what do you now have? 2 divided by 2 is 1. Thank you. So you have 23 chromosome or else just N in each one of these. So you can see that meiosis is a way of reducing the number of chromosomes. You have to, right? Because all the normal cells in the body have just 46 chromosomes. If I wanted to make a baby, I need to have one that has 23 and one that has 23, so that when they combine, they go back to being a normal cell that has 46. Okay? Because if I have one that's 46 and one that's 23 and they combine, what's going to happen? I would have a cell with 69 chromosomes, and that doesn't happen in nature, so it would be destroyed.
So you have to have the same number?
Yeah, because all the other cells in human cells have 46 chromosomes except for gametes. So if in a human you have cells that are not 46 chromosomes, that are also not gametes, that cell doesn't exist. It's not viable. And that's why the gametes have to go down to 23 chromosomes so that when they combine, they go back to being a normal cell. So this first cell is a zygote. And then that zygote undergoes mitosis and divides and divides and divides until it becomes an embryo, divides and divides, becomes a specialized cell, that specialized organ like the heart, becomes the brain, cells that form the brain, cells that form the arm, cells that form the internal organs until you have a fetus. That's a really sad looking fetus, but that's a fetus. Okay? So you have the purpose of mitosis is to narrow down the chromosome so that it's only 23 per cell. Otherwise, it can't combine and form a zygote, because in order to be a zygote, it has to have 46 only. Okay, so in meiosis 1, it undergoes cell division. It just divides and becomes 2 cells that are referred to as the secondary spermatocytes. So if on a test I ask you, true or false, primary spermatocytes have 46 chromosomes, what would you say?
False.
So let me ask you that again. True or false, primary spermatocytes have 46 chromosomes, what would you say?
Oh, that's true because they divide.
They haven't
Right?
divided yet. Primary spermatocytes have not divided yet, so they still have 46 chromosomes. If on the test I ask you, true or false, secondary spermatocytes have 46 chromosomes, now you say what? And that is correct. Okay, secondaries have only 23, so what would the answers to that question be? I'll ask the question one more time. Secondary spermatocytes have 46 chromosomes, true or false?
False.
Correct. Okay, excellent. Now, male reproductive system is all about quantity over quality. They're so busy making as much sperm as they can because the goal is to be able to pass on that chromosome. Okay, so that they can like pass on their genetic makeup. Okay, so that's just the first step of meiosis. The second step in meiosis is actually where they copy and divide. They're not happy with just 2. They actually want to end up with 4. Okay? Now, to be able to end up with 4, you have to copy first before you divide. Otherwise, if you just divided, how many chromosomes would you have in each cell after second meiosis? If you did not copy first and you just divided, and the goal is to make as many as you can, so you're going to try to make 4 cells. So if you try to do this without copying first, you will get half of 23, exactly. So half of 23 would be what, like 12.5? Right? Is that right? 12.5. No. Be okay. So, and that doesn't work either, because remember, gametes have to have 23 exactly. And that's why they have to copy first and then divide. So let's go through that. So after meiosis 1, you have secondary spermatocytes. Thank you, 11.5. So each secondary spermatocyte has 23 chromosomes, or N. So before they move on to meiosis 2, they have to copy. So temporarily, it's going to become 2N again. Okay. And then they divide. So when they divide, how much they become a spermatid, and each spermatid would have how many chromosomes? Because they do copy and temporarily become 2N again before they divide. So spermatids would have how many chromosomes? 23. So back to being N. Okay, let's finish the story up and go back and follow it more thoroughly. So in meiosis 1, if it divides, chromosome 1 goes to this side right here. Chromosome 1 goes to this side. Chromosome 2, chromosome 2, chromosome 3, chromosome 3, all the way down to chromosome 23. But we established that chromosome 23 has an X and a Y, which means that 1 will go on one side and 1 would go on the other side. Okay? So then the spermatids would have, so the 2 spermatids on the left-hand side would have what? 23rd chromosome. So chromosome 23 here is an X. Chromosome 23 here is a Y, which means these 2 chromosomes right here are going to have what? For their 23rd chromosome.
XY.
Nope, because it only had an X.
Oh, then the ones on left would be XX, and the ones on the right would be YY.
Perfect. Okay. So when this combines with the female gamete, now female gametes only have what as their 23rd chromosome? Females only have X and X. So females can only donate a gamete that has X, where males can donate a gamete that has X or a gamete that has Y, which means who determines the gender of a baby?
The male.
Right. Someone should have told Henry VIII that, so he'd stop killing his wives. So males determine the gender of a child depending on which sperm penetrates the egg. All eggs for the 23rd chromosome can only be X. Males, for every spermatogonium, it contributes 2 spermatids that have X and 2 spermatids that have Y. So depending on which sperm penetrates the egg, that's what determines gender. Okay, so now I'm going to go back to the, yep, go ahead.
But only one penetrates the egg, right?
Yes.
But what about twins? Is there 2?
So with twins, there are 2 types of twins, okay? You can have twins because the mom, each month, she normally releases 1 egg. But occasionally, she can produce 2 eggs. And then the 2 eggs get fertilized by 2 sperm. That's one option. The other option is that 1 egg is fertilized by 1 sperm, and then that divides, completely splits. So a zygote splits and becomes, or copies and splits and becomes 2 zygotes. Okay? But there's never a time where, well, I shouldn't say that. If 2 sperms penetrate 1 egg, that means you will have 23 from mom, 23 from 1 sperm, and 23 from another sperm. Is that a viable cell?
No.
No, that wouldn't exist. Okay. So it either is 2 separate eggs that have been fertilized by 2 separate sperm, or an egg and a zygote that's completely split off, and then they start undergoing mitosis. Okay, so we call these identical twins. The second scenario right here, we call these identical twins because it came from 1 cell and then that 1 cell split completely, and then it starts dividing on its own and then eventually becomes a fetus on its own.
So really, compared to the female reproductive system, there's not that many steps from spermatogonium to the 4 sperm options. Is there any kind of a written formula that, like, any type of a written formula for this? Like, from
It-
that
it-
process? I mean, because there could be one created, which could be remembered, and then you could kind of remember where it goes from 2N to 1N and back. And is there any written formula anywhere for this?
Not that I know of. There's not really a formula, but just understanding how many chromosomes are in each cell, because it's technically not really math. So yeah, I mean, if you make one though, share it with me. I will share it with the rest of the class, but there is not one that I know of.
Can
It's
you
just, yeah, go
Oh.
ahead.
can you write out like for each step when it goes to 2N to 1N to like 23 to 46 back to 23 to 40? Like I'm confused because I just hear 23 46 for like
Yeah,
different steps.
yep. So let's go back. I know that there were some chats in there, but let me answer this one chat first. So is there a 50% chance of producing either boy or girl? And technically, yes, there is a 50% chance. Okay. All right, so let's go back and do that one more time. Okay. So let me go.
See a question real quick.
Yeah.
The on that diagram right there, the N, it goes from 2N to 1N. Is that because you divide it?
Be a little bit more specific. Are you talking about meiosis 1 or meiosis 2?
Meiosis 1, I think, where it says it's the 2N, that big one, and then it splits into the 1N. Is that because you divide that?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. Okay.
I
All
guess,
right.
sorry.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
Real quick, like the part where it says 2 secondary spermatocytes, it has
Mhm.
two, like an N and an N, and then it splits again to an N and an N, and then an N and an N. So does it go from 23 to like half of 23?
Right. We
Like-
went through that, right? It doesn't, because gametes can't be less than 23. And that's why in meiosis 2, it has to copy first and then divide. And that's why temporarily, when it copies, it goes back to being 2N to prepare for another division.
Oh, okay.
Yep, I think that's the missing step that you had. Yeah, sound good? Okay, let's do that one more time with a different version. Your questions inspired me to do an activity. So let's do another activity. Okay. Okay. So we're going to start with a spermatogonium. Okay. So the spermatogonium, okay, and this time I'm going to put X and Y to indicate what the N is. Okay.
So that's 2N right
This
now.
is 2N. Right now it's 2N. Yep. Here, let me do N is equal to 23 chromosomes. Okay. So if the N with a sub X, meaning the 23rd chromosome, has the X. And then if it's NY, it means that the 23rd chromosome is a Y. Okay, I mean, like I can write it out: chromosome 1, chromosome 1, chromosome 2, chromosome 2, all the way down to chromosome 23, chromosome 23. And if this is a spermatogonium, one of them has to be an X and one of them has to be a Y. Does that make sense?
How will you know which one's X and Y?
And that's why I indicated this pair right here has an X, this pair right here has a Y. Does that make sense, Juliet?
Yeah, kind of.
Okay.
Is that the daughter cells?
No, we're starting with just the spermatogonium right now.
Oh,
We
okay.
haven't gone anywhere. Okay, let me see. All right, so here's chromosome 1, chromosome 1, chromosome 2, chromosome 2, and so on. Okay, so that's what chromosomes look like, and that's why you see in, you know, like X files, because it's trying to copy the chromosomes like this. Okay, so this technically is chromosome 1, chromosome 1. Does that make sense? So then if you move it down further to the 23rd chromosome, so Juliet, chromosome X looks like this, or chromosome Y looks like that. Rather than drawing what the actual chromosome looks like, I just put it an X here and a Y here. So that's how you know it's an indicator that one of those pairs of chromosomes has an X and one of those pairs of chromosome has a Y. It doesn't matter which is which, as long as one has an X, one has a Y. That is what indicates a male cell. Okay, so male cells in their 23rd chromosome pair, they must have an X and a Y, otherwise they're not male. Okay, the only other option is an X and an X, which then would be a cell of a female. Questions? Yes, so a spermatogonium is an XY. Juliet, does that make more sense? Kind of? Okay, so
So it's an
yeah, go
XY
ahead.
because it originates, because of where it originated from as spermagonium. Because it has to be an XY, like this whole cycle.
It has to be an XY because
If that makes
it's
any
from a male.
sense. Right, right. Because the male has the XY and the female only has the XX. So that's why
Correct.
it has to be. Okay. Yeah, that's what I
Exactly.
meant by the whole cycle of life. Yeah, okay.
Got it. Yep. Okay. So this spermatogonium is going to undergo mitosis. And remember, mitosis is just a copy and divide to produce identical cells. So it's going to copy itself. So just temporarily, it's going to become a cell that has NX, NX, NY, and NY. Because it copied. Okay. Then temporarily, well, not temporary, and then it's going to split.
Okay, so that's your two daughter cells right there, right?
Now it's going to become, it's going to split like this. And X and Y and X and Y. These are your daughter cells. At the end of mitosis, where it copies and divides, it's going to copy and divide into these two daughter cells.
And that's meiosis phase 1.
Nope, this is mitosis.
Meiosis.
Nope, this is mitosis. So in mitosis, it's a step that involves two parts. One, it's going to copy. Two, it's going to divide. So this is the copying stage, and this is the dividing stage. So it
So
copies, right?
one is one of those is then alpha and one of them is in beta, right?
Yes, so this will be type A, one of them. And if you ask me which type, it doesn't really matter, right? It's just one becomes one and one becomes the other. So one becomes type A and one becomes type B. Could I have reversed that? Absolutely. Okay, but whatever becomes type A goes back and repeats this process. The other one,
Oh, sorry.
go ahead. No, go ahead.
Which part did you say was the divide and the copy part?
So 1 is copy, so here's 1. So that's the copying part. It was X, NX, and NY, and now it is NX, NX, NY, NY, so it copied. And then step 2 is right here. And that's the dividing. So now it goes back to being one cell that has NX and NY, and another cell that becomes NX and NY.
So basically type B is kind of, it's all up to it to, fertilize the egg.
Eventually.
Okay. Because type
So
A
it-
has to go back.
Yep, and repeat this process so that you can continuously make sperm. Yep. So then the type B will differentiate and become a primary spermatocyte. Okay. And this primary spermatocyte is what goes into meiosis 1 and 2. Okay. So let's go into meiosis 1. Okay, we're going to save meiosis 2 for later. So when the primary spermatocyte, which has 2N, okay, and I just indicated with the gender on it, with the 23rd chromosome so that you know what they are. When it undergoes meiosis 1, remind me what happens in meiosis 1 again?
Division.
Yes. So it's just going to go like this, split. And now you have 2 cells. What should I write in them?
1N.
Which one? NX or NY? It doesn't really matter, right? If one is 1X, the other one was.
There's still 1N either way, both of them, right? 23 and 23.
Yep. But I'm trying to help you follow like the gender as well, the 23rd chromosome. So it doesn't matter what goes in which one, but one of them must be 1X and one of them must be NX and the other one must be N.
Why? Okay. Oh, so they have, okay. So when they go to 23, one's always, I didn't know that. So one is 23 is 1N as X and the other is 1N as Y. Okay.
Exactly. And that's why I drew the NX and NY so you can see that.
And you say 23, like 23 chromosomes, right? Not 23 pairs chromosomes.
Correct. Excellent. So when I say 23, I mean just 23. And that's why you only see this N instead of a 2 in front of it. Okay. So let's go back in here and fill in the numbers just to make sure we're clear. 46 here, 92 here, 46 here, 46 here, 46 here, 23 here, 23 here. Let that look it over for a minute. I'll give you a minute to kind of look it over and then we'll go through it together. Okay. Questions? So let me ask you questions then. Okay. this cell right here, why does this cell have 92 chromosomes?
Because the spermatogonium copied.
Yes.
That-
Yep. Because it's preparing for what process?
Meiosis.
Not meiosis, but mitosis. Yep. Okay, so this cell is temporarily 92 because it's preparing for mitosis. Okay. You ready for the next question? Why does this cell not do the same? Why does this cell have 46 instead of copying to be 92 first?
Because it's doing meiosis.
Yes. And the purpose of meiosis is to do what?
Divide.
Yes. Divide to create gametes. It's to get rid of extra chromosome. I think you have a better understanding of mitosis versus meiosis now. Okay. All right, so with that, we're going to move on. So this is meiosis 1. And again, in meiosis 1, it's just a division. It just divides.
But
Okay.
we're not at the end of the process here, or are we? I mean, I thought I wanted. I mean, how would you formula this? You were going to go. Each of these then is going to copy, and then how do you get to the 4?
Right. Because we just covered meiosis 1.
Oh, okay, I see.
Okay. So the next part is meiosis 2. Now, in meiosis 2, okay, it's going to copy first and followed by another divide. So in meiosis 2, it's very similar to mitosis in terms of the process, but it has a different function. Okay. So in meiosis 2, it also copies and divides, but it's trying to produce gametes, not necessarily identical cells. As a matter of fact, at the end of meiosis 2, you will not have identical cells. Okay. So in meiosis 2, so you've got the primary spermatocyte that undergoes meiosis 1. After meiosis 1, what are these cells called? What are these cells called?
Secondary spermatocytes.
Perfect. Okay. So these are called secondary spermatocytes. Now the secondary spermatocyte undergo meiosis 2. Now, in order to undergo meiosis 2, what must it temporarily do first?
Hey, Professor, do you mind pulling the screen down a little bit? I can't see your writing. Okay, I
That's-
can see it better. Thank you.
Okay. So at the end, so meiosis 2, what does it have to do first temporarily before it can divide?
Copy.
Go to 46.
That's right. It's going to have to copy. You both gave me the right answer. Okay, it's the same answer. it's going to have to copy first. So it's going to go N, Y, and N, Y. In other words, 46, just temporarily. N, X, N, X, or otherwise 46. And then it does the second step where it divides. So now it has 4. This being NX. What should I put in this cell?
Can you move your screen down a little bit more?
I can't unless I move, but I can zoom in. Oops, too much. How about that?
Yeah, that's better.
Okay, so one of these cells is NX. What would the cell next to it have?
Annex again.
Perfect. What about these down here?
And why?
Perfect. This one?
And why?
And why?
Yes, you got it. Woo!
So there's
All right.
there's always 2 in X and always 2 in Y. Right?
After meiosis 2.
Okay, got you.
Yep. Now these cells are called what? Once it finishes meiosis 2, you now have 4 what?
Spermatids.
Spermatids. Yay! You got it. That's it. And that is spermatogenesis.
I understand that.
Huh?
I think I understand that.
Yay! Excellent. Okay. Now, spermiogenesis is next. So let's continue. Okay, let me zoom in. Okay. You can still see it though, yes?
Yes.
So now back to this original picture. Hopefully that helps makes this picture a little bit more sense now. Okay. So here, the spermatids is going to undergo spermiogenesis. Spermiogenesis is the maturation of a sperm cell. Now the spermatids, if you look right here, what's the major difference between the 4 spermatids in this picture versus the 4 sperm cells?
They don't have a tail. I don't know.
That's exactly it, Juliet.
They
You
grew
actually
up.
gave me, exactly, they grew up. Yeah. So you'll notice that their shape is different. They now have a head. They now have a mid-piece.
Oh, it's like they're like a baby, but like they grow up to become an adult kind of thing.
That's exactly it. That's what you just defined spermiogenesis. Spermiogenesis is where the spermatids, they don't change chromosome anymore. They're done with their chromosome, but now they change what they look like. They become adults. So the spermatids form the head, the midpiece, and the tail, which is called the flagella. And that is spermiogenesis.
So the spermatids become sperm.
Yeah, exactly.
It's actually kind of cool.
It is. Okay. Questions? So I hope I answered the question that you had in terms of what's the difference between a spermatogenesis versus spermiogenesis. And then I also went through the process of spermatogenesis. Questions?
Are you gonna be able to quickly go over the flow of sperm, like from what or what parts it goes through, I guess?
Yeah, let's do that. Okay. So all of that we just went through happens in the testes. Okay. And specifically, the sperm production. So in order to understand this, you have to kind of go back and take a look at where it's produced and by what cell. Okay. So you have these tubes in the, so the testes right here, this is the testes. Okay. So the testes is made up of these tubes called the seminiferous tubules. Okay, the seminiferous tubule is lined with cells on the surface right here. And cells in here. Oh, it didn't change color. Let me change the color. And cells in here. Okay. So the cells on this are testes and testis, the same thing. Yeah. So the cells on the surface right here are called germinal epithelium. That's where spermiogenesis starts, because the germinal epithelium produces the spermatogoniums. Okay, the spermatogoniums are going to develop, they're going to be produced, and they're going to move through these cells right here. Oop. Why did it not change color? These cells, which is referred to as succenticular cells. Okay, so the germinal epithelium produces, let's use what color? Let's use black. So they produce, oh, why did it change color? There you go. So it produces the spermatids, and the spermatids are going to travel through the succenticular cells into the lumen of this tube. So once a sperm cell is produced, it's going to move through the succenticular cells until it gets into the lumen. It's going to move through the lumen, making its way along the testes until finally it reaches this portion right here, which is the rete testes. Okay. And then from there, the sperm is going to go into this next part, which is the C-shaped structure that surrounds the testes. So from the tube, it's going to go into the rete testes. From the rete testes, it's going to go into the epididymis. So that's the C-shaped structure right here. And you can see from the epididymis, it moves up this ductus deferens. The ductus deferens goes all the way up and around the urinary bladder until finally it moves through this, it passes through this gland right here called the seminal vesicles. It goes through the ductus deferens. I'm sorry, it goes through the ejaculatory duct right here, joins up with the urethra, moves through the urethra, through the penis, and then out. That's the flow of urine. I'm sorry, that is the flow of urine, but that's also the flow of semen and sperm. Okay, so
Okay,
it's produced.
Oh, sorry.
No, that's okay. Produced at the
Oh.
germinal epithelium, moves through the sustentacular cells, goes through the lumen, and as it's going through the lumen, it makes its way to the retices, the epididymis, the ductus deferens, and then through the ejaculatory duct, through the urethra, and then out. Okay? Questions?
Males and females both have ureters, right?
Yep,
And do they both have urethras?
yep. It's just that one's
Okay.
longer than the other.
And they're in different locations.
Yep.
Got it.
Which one has longer urethras?
Males.
That's right. And because of that, who tends to have more urinary tract infections?
Males do?
No, females
Females.
do, because they have a shorter urethra.
Really? I did not know that.
Yep. Females have more urinary tract infections because they have a shorter urethra. So in other words, it takes less for bacteria to move from the external environment up the internal environment. Where males, because their urethra is longer, they're less likely to have urinary tract infections. It doesn't mean they can't. We're not saying they can't, because that's, again, inequities in science, right? To say that males would never get it, they do get it. It's just less common. Okay. All right. Can you put either one on the exam? Okay, so about the testes versus the testis. Let me double check. I will double check that. Okay. All right. So let's move backwards and go to the female, which is super hard. And that's why I wanted to go
Okay.
to the, yeah.
On the lab practice, it says testis. That's why I asked the question, because I've been practicing with testis.
Yeah, whatever you see written in the PDF, that is for sure going to be accepted.
Okay, gotcha.
Yep. All right, so let's go through the
So-
feet. Yep, go ahead.
If we put testes, that would be wrong, even though they're the same thing.
It will be marked wrong, but I'll have to go in and correct them.
Okay.
But if you want to be safe, whatever appears on the PDF will always be the correct answer for the lab. Because that's what the lab question and correct answer is based on, is what is written in the PDF. Make sense? But if it's still accurate, but just like a plural version of it, then I go in and I adjust the points. Okay, so moving on to oogenesis. So in oogenesis, there's a lot of differences. Okay, so I want to spend the majority. Again, I'm not going to have enough time to cover all the steps in oogenesis or all the steps in the female reproductive, but I want to at least cover the oogenesis because it's the most complicated. And then you can watch the supplemental video where I have more time and I actually go through the entire reproductive cycle. Okay. But I wanted to at least go through oogenesis for you so that you can ask me any questions you may have. Now, oogenesis is a female version of what happens in spermatogenesis with several exceptions. So kind of pay attention to those exceptions, okay? The first one being that spermatogenesis starts at puberty in a male. Spermatogenesis starts at puberty in a male, where oogenesis starts during the female's fetal development that long ago. Okay, it doesn't start when she reaches puberty. It has already started while she was still developing in her mother's womb. Okay, and that's why this right here is a key factor. During fetal development of the female, she's going to have oogonia cells, which is like a version of the spermatogonium. These are stem cells, okay, that undergo mitosis. So similar, right? And similarly, it's going to, under mitosis, it's going to result in two identical daughter cells. Okay, so let's fix this image, this picture over here to indicate that. So the oogonia is going to undergo mitosis. It's going to copy and divide. Okay, so that it's going to result in two daughter cells, this daughter cell and this daughter cell. Okay, this daughter cell is going to stay as an oogonia and repeat this process, where this daughter cell is going to differentiate and become a primary oocyte.
So it'll go from 46 to 92 is
Perfect. That's right. You got it. So I could put an intermediate right here. Let me make it a little bit bigger so I can write easier. Can you still see that okay?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So this oogonia, and you're absolutely right, is going to temporarily become 92 chromosomes. And you add numbers for each step. Yes. Okay, so this, it's just that they drew the cells so small. So I'm just going to put next to it, right? So 46 is going to temporarily become 92 because it has to copy first. And it's going to divide. So it's going to become 2n, which is going back to 46. And this one is going back to 46 as well. And that it happens before the female is ever even born. So this is during her fetal development. Okay. Now the primary oocyte begins the first meiosis, but does not complete it. Begins meiosis 1, but does not complete. Okay, and the reason for that is because this whole process stops or pauses. It doesn't really stop, but it pauses at a female's birth. So the female is born right about here.
and the reason it stops is because there's not the necessary hormones to go through puberty, basically, right?
Yeah, not at the female's birth. No.
Yeah. Okay.
So, yep. So the mother gives birth to the female here, and birth pauses this process. Okay. Now at puberty, at the female's puberty, this whole process begins again. Why? At puberty, what's released?
Yeah, take a wild guess.
Mhm.
Is it oxytocin?
Close, but not quite. It's definitely one of the female hormones. Keep listing them off. Not oxytocin,
Estrogen,
not estrogen,
progesterone.
not progesterone.
Um,
Keep going. You only have a few left at this point. It's a good review of the hormone chapter anyways.
What's it start with?
It starts with an F.
oh.
Oh, I don't know.
Follicles.
Matt, you're real close. Follicle stimulating hormone.
I was
Follicles.
so close.
Follicle stimulating hormone. Okay, so FSH is what really triggers this process in a female at puberty. So at puberty, the primary oocyte will complete meiosis 1. Okay, so at puberty, the primary oocyte that was paused, it began meiosis 1, but it didn't complete it, right? It's going to complete it. Can someone remind me what happens in meiosis 1?
Copy and divide.
Nope.
Divide.
Yes. Okay. Which is why it goes from 2N to 2 cells that are called secondary oocytes. Okay. And it's just 1N. It just divides. Okay, so same as male, right? So from the primary spermatocyte, it becomes a secondary spermatocyte. 2 secondary spermatocytes that now have gone down to 1N. Where in males, I had to put 1N was an X and 1N was a Y. Do I have to do that here?
No.
No, because there's no
I-
Y.
Exactly. I don't have to indicate because they're the same. Both are going to be X. So I don't even have to indicate it. I can just say N. And you should know that it's going to be the 23rd chromosome in either one, in both would be what?
There's never going to be a Y.
That's right. Okay. So it's going to produce 2 secondary oocytes, okay, with 1N each. So at this point, how many chromosomes should I write in here? What number?
23.
Yes, very good, Matt.
Because that polar body is going to get, what's that polar body going to, isn't it going to get rid
That's
of
a great question. That's a great question. So in this drawing, it's a little bit erroneous because it's not really the same size. One of them is going to be a lot bigger, like this, and it has all of the cytoplasma, it has all of the organelles, and it has everything in it, where the other one is just a shell of a cell. Okay, so the polar body means it's just a way of getting rid of the extra chromosome. And what happens is that that cell is going to undergo atresia. What that means is that it's going to disintegrate.
Right, because the one that one is the one that's going to produce all the progesterone, right? Just
Yeah,
carry on, and the polar
that's
body
right.
gets radios. Okay.
Yep. And that's why I try to emphasize in males, it's about quantity. In female, it's about quality. So males, they're only contributing the sperm because technically the egg is what the body of the egg is actually what becomes the zygote, and it's just taking the 23 chromosomes from the sperm. But in a female, because the egg becomes the zygote, and that's why technically, even though we say each person is half from mom and half from dad, technically that's not true. Technically, you are 50+% from mom because the mitochondria, the organelles that she contributes in the body of that egg cell, the mitochondria contains DNA. So technically, you're a little bit more of your mom than you are your dad. Okay? Because you have the chromosome, you have the mitochondrial DNA. Okay? Even though technically 23 chromosomes came from mom, 23 chromosomes came from dad, but you also had the mitochondria chromosomes, DNA that came with the cell itself. So technically, you're a little bit more mom than you are dad. Okay? So for Mother's Day, make sure you get her something nice. Okay. Anyways, so the polar body is just a way of getting rid of that extra chromosome because it knows, the female body knows that at the end of the day, it's only going to release 1 egg per month, where males produce thousands of sperm. Okay? Females per month, only 1, and it's got to be the best egg. Okay? So that's why here's one major difference. Technically, there are 2 secondary oocytes, just like there are 2 spermatocytes, but one of them disintegrates. as just a way of getting rid of the extra chromosome. So this process here doesn't even happen right there. That's what would have happened if that polar body survived, but it doesn't. So we're just gonna eliminate that, okay? So at the end of meiosis 1, how many cells do you have?
Uh, 23, right? Because it hasn't divided yet.
No, sir, I asked how many cells, not chromosomes.
Oh,
Oh, 2.
No,
1.
1.
There were 2 there, but the polar body got rid of 1.
That's right. That's right. Okay. So it's still technically it's already narrowed down, right? But it's nature. So nature has to complete the cycle. Okay, but here's the problem. A secondary oocyte does not start meiosis 2. Ooh, why does it never change color for me? The secondary meiosis right here, there's a clause on this. The secondary meiosis only occurs if the egg is fertilized. Okay, the secondary oocyte only undergoes meiosis 2 if the egg is fertilized. If the egg is not fertilized, then at the end of that cycle, a female will menstruate the blood that lines the endometrium, as well as the secondary oocyte just gets expelled. Nothing else continues to happen. Because it does not start meiosis 2 unless it is fertilized by a sperm. Okay. If it is fertilized by a sperm, the minute that the sperm penetrates the egg, then it will undergo meiosis 2. So a big clause here, if fertilized, then it will undergo meiosis 2. And remind me what meiosis 2 includes?
Copy and divide.
Very good, Juliet. Copy and divide. Okay, so here, there's the sperm. It's bringing 23 chromosomes, but it's going to leave those chromosomes in there by itself for a little bit so it can finish meiosis 2. Okay, so the egg itself or the ovum has to copy and divide. So it's temporarily going to be 2N, and then it's going to divide and expel another polar body that has an N, so that eventually the one N that stays in there combines with the N in the sperm, and voila, you have a zygote.
So it goes from 23 to 46 back to 23.
Yes. That's right. So technically, at the end of meiosis 2, it has that big cell that has the N from the mom, and then it's going to produce a smaller cell that has another N as the polar body. The polar body disintegrates. It has completed the natural cycle of meiosis. In other words, it's finished meiosis 1 and meiosis 2. So now it can take that N and combine it with the sperm's N to produce a zygote. 1 N from mom, 1 N from dad. Mom's always going to contribute an X. Dad's going to contribute an X or a Y. And that's
So
what
those-
determines
yeah.
the gender.
So those divided would be yeah, well, never mind. I understand.
Okay. So female is much more complicated.
You know, if if scientists were like more advanced back in the days when we had kings, then a lot of women would have been killed.
I love that, Juliet. Yes. That's right. Yeah. So that's just oogenesis. Okay. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have for tonight because I still want to get to the questions. But you want to make sure that you also cover this next step right here. Oh, why is that putting this? Which is follicular genesis. So we are still missing follicular genesis, and we're missing the lining, the uterine lining. So I've only told you a third of the story. Okay, so you need to go watch that video to hear the other 2/3 of the story of how the female reproductive system works. I've only covered 1/3. Okay, questions?
So to answer questions on the test.
Mm-hmm.
So what type of example of a question would you give for this? Because you're going to have to, the only way you can get these answers right is you have to think your way all the way through linearly from the start to the finish, really.
Yeah, yep. And you know what? A really good way to make sure you understand everything, in the worksheet, there's this table that I provided, and I also provide the answer too. Do I have it in here? I probably don't. I don't. But there's this table that walks through every single thing of the female reproductive and separates it out, but at the same time links them together. So it's really cool study tool to use. So make sure you use that. And let me pull it up for you so that you can see what it looks like. Can you still see my screen? Can you see my Google?
No.
Oh, okay. Let me change this.
Professor, this was really helpful, so I appreciate it.
Yeah. Let me stop sharing. Let me share my screen.
Some of us are on the edge, but we're going to make it.
That's right. Okay. Can you see my Google now?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So creates las.com. So this is our website. It contains the same information, and I actually linked our Canvas to the site. But if you go down to female reproductive, I have these PDFs. So here's the first one that goes through kind of what we just talked about. And it might have a little bit more like visuals that may help, but I think all of you seem to have gotten it. So what would be more useful is this first one right here. There we go. So this one right here, this is part of your worksheet, but essentially it's nice because it like goes through the 3 parts: oogenesis, follicular genesis, and uterine wall. And it does so that you can do it separately and you can see the stages. So what happens in the follicular phase, what happens in ovulation, what happens in the luteal phase, compared to in the uterine wall, it has the menstrual phase, the proliferative phase, the ovulation phase, the secretory phase, and the premenstrual phase. And it kind of goes through the key things that you need to know in each of these steps.